Hello and welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be doing this gourd and I'm going to do it in watercolour. Now I went to the supermarket yesterday and picked this one because I thought it was absolutely beautiful, all the different colours in it, and it's quite a nice shape as well. Some lovely curves here going over and all these lovely colours. So at this time of year it's easy to pick up a gourd in your local supermarket, and it's something that's nice both to do as an observational drawing but also to get those colours in. So I decided to do it in watercolour, and I've also decided to do it wet on dry, so building up the layers gradually. So which method you choose to do really sometimes is dictated by the subject, and with this one, because it's got all these markings on top of the lighter yellow colour and we've got darker markings on top, the easiest way to do it really is to do the base colours first and then build up to these darker tones on top. So we'll begin by doing a drawing. Now when you're doing a drawing for something like a still life and you want to see where the shadows are and things, it's a good idea to sit it on top of some white paper rather than just sitting it on your desk where there might be different shadows and colours and things. If you put it on top of a white paper, the shadows show up really easily. Okay, so I'm just looking at it. It's got one or two little carbuncles in here, got little bits of things fastened to it. I'm not sure what they are, but very interesting. So again, how much detail we put in this is going to be interesting as well, because we could probably go on for ages putting lots and lots of details in, but really we just want to feel for the overall shape and getting these three main colours in really. We've got the yellow in the base, a light green there going up to a darker green, sorry, four colours, and then we've got the orange here, and the green is a very blue green. So I'll put that in front of me and decide which way round to pop it to get the most interest, so we can see that stem as well. I've just had that tissue there to preserve my paper. So this is a £140 watercolour pad, and it's a hot press one, so nice and smooth, so we can do a nice accurate drawing. So the main thing about when you're drawing and when you're sat at the table drawing and you're doing a still life is don't alter your position. Don't do part of your drawing sat down and then stand up and do the drawing, because your eye level is going to be different. You're going to be looking at your object from a different angle. So once you've started, you need to keep the same angle, keep your object in the same place, and keep the distance between the object and your eyes in the same position. If you move backwards and forwards, your measurements are going to be wrong and the shape's going to be wrong. So I'm going to actually start by doing a sort of a very big circle for the top, which I'm going to fit the top into. So a very big ellipse shape that top's going to fit into, and then the base added to that, which is coming around here. So get your arm moving, make that nice and fluid. Don't be too tight with this drawing. And then look at where the stem is in the centre. So the stem's about there somewhere. Okay, and that gets your basic shape and your basic points in. And then if you want, you can quickly measure it to make sure you've got the measurements accurate. So if I look at the pumpkin, it's actually a fair bit wider than it is tall. So I've actually got it too tall. It needs to come off about here somewhere. I'll rub that bit out. So just a quick measurement, and it doesn't need to be perfectly accurate because nobody else is going to have this particular pumpkin in front of them afterwards when they're looking at your picture. So if we look to begin with, we've got all these shapes coming up from the centre here. So we'll get that more accurate, the actual stem to begin with. It's got a little bit going off to the side, but some of this detail we're going to be putting in with the paint, and it's got a lot of, like I said, carbuncle type things sticking to it. And then I can see this little shape coming out around that. And when you're doing still lives, make sure you just paint what you see and not what you imagine to see. So carefully follow each line. And where it goes to the bottom there, it's actually going around. And this is going to take me a while to get all these shapes in, so perhaps speed up the video at some point whilst I'm doing this. And just work your way around following these shapes. And then once you've done that, you see what I mean, they make a natural shape here at the bottom. Once you've done that, you can then rub out these guidelines. And make sure you don't come all the way into the centre because it's a little bit flat around here, but the pumpkin that you choose or the gourd that you choose might be completely different to this, so you're going to have to do it on individual basis. And where it's going away from us around the corner, we're not seeing this bottom bit anymore because it's out of the way from us. And some of them are steeper than others. This one finishes here and this one's further round, so you're really going to have to look very carefully. But if you have one more, I don't know what you call them, ridge than is on here, nobody's going to know later, nobody's going to come along and count them all. And they vary in width. Some of them are much wider and fatter than others. This one here is particularly wide, it goes right up from there, but it's sort of split into two here. So now we're going to the back, so you can see how we've gone, again we can see that shape there, whereas we couldn't see it on these ones down here because it's quite flat down that side. So I'm going to carry on doing that all the way around, and I'll come back to you in a moment when I've finished that. Now we've got the pumpkin itself drawn, or the gourd should I say, it's sometimes a good idea just to put a bit of a guide up to where your shadows are, and you might have more than one shadow overlapping. I've got a couple of lights on in here, but I've also got the light from the window, so I've not just got one shadow, I've actually got two, and they're overlapping in the centre there. So I've got a window from this direction and from this direction. And if you don't put the shadows in, it's just going to look as if it's floating in mid-air. So you do want an indication of where those shadows are. So just look how far they come out and put a light line into where they are. And now we'll go and get our watercolours. To begin with, I've chosen a raw sienna. You could choose a different yellow if you liked, as long as it's quite a pale yellow with plenty of water in it. But if you wanted to make it a bit brighter, you could use something like a cadmium, but I think I'm going to stick with the earth tones for this first layer and use this. Actually, I'm going to go straight over the stem, not worry about painting around anything, we'll just cover the whole thing. So you see I've got a nice big brush and just going over all those pencil lines, which we're not going to lose, they'll still show through because it's a very weak wash. I haven't actually made a great job of rubbing out some of my guidelines. You could spend a bit more time than I have getting rid of more of those guidelines, but you tend to find that your pencil lines become less and less obvious as you carry on with your painting and you build the paint up. So nice big brush so we can cover the whole thing quite quickly without it starting to dry out and us getting lines and things. But also a brush with a nice point so that we can get into these little shapes at the end there. Once you've done the whole thing, whilst it's still wet like that, before we leave it to dry, you might want to just squeeze your brush out, clean it and squeeze out the water. Take a look at the gourd. It's going to be different to mine because of where the light sources are in your room, but look at where the light's catching the most and perhaps take out one or two highlights now, so that we don't have to worry about getting that light back later. So it's just in one or two places where it's really light. It's actually catching the light a little bit on the top of there as well. And all this helps make the shape as well. So even when you're drawing your highlights, you're not painting, you're removing the paint, but still move your arm and your brush in the direction that the whole object's going. And that's probably enough for now. And if you've put too many highlights in, it doesn't matter because you can come back later and cover those up with more paint. So I'll just leave that now to completely dry. Whilst that's been drying, I've made up the orange colour. And the orange colour tends to be mostly in between the lines and a little bit more around the base. And I've made it from cadmium orange, but I've added some cadmium yellow into it because the cadmium orange on its own was a little bit too much on the red side. I'm just going to look at where I can see it and paint it on. Like I say, working wet on dry, I often work wet in wet. So this is, you know, unusual for me to be working like this. But if I just look very carefully at where all the orange is and just keep plugging away, you'll have to leave little gaps where there's a change in colour. But don't forget that the green that you're going to be putting on over the top of this is much darker, so you can just lay it on top. You don't have to worry about painting around where those green areas are. So this is going to take a little bit of time to build up all this colour, and now that I'm looking at it, this base colour of the yellow, I mean, it's shining through it quite nicely. You can see, and you can see that when it dries that's going to show through, but actually in some places we do need a little bit more yellow just on its own, so I'll also come back and do one or two little areas of yellow as well. So you can see I'm working with a smaller brush than I began with. I began with quite a large brush, just putting that first coat on. So this one's a number 6 round brush, and it's just the Winsor and Newton Cotman. Those of you that are regular to my channel will know that in the description below I always put a link, if I can, to the products that I use. But there's also a link in the description below in all my videos for a little shop area where I put all the products all together, the things that I use, so it's easy for you to find and have a look at. But Winsor and Newton Cotman brushes are reasonably priced and they're pretty handy for a lot of jobs. There's nothing wrong with a synthetic brush, using a synthetic brush. So again, can you see how I'm going around the shape, just picking up the shape, and in some places there's a lot more orange than in others. Some of these areas there's hardly any at all. So it's just a question of keep looking back and observing, looking at where that orange colour sits. You'll have to excuse me, I keep getting a bit of a frog in my throat today. So yeah, this is just going to take a little bit of time just to build up all these little dots and dashes and lines. So I'll come back to you in a moment once I've put all the orange on, and we'll come on in with the perhaps a little bit more yellow and the green as well, and build up the detail. You'll see I also added extra yellow to that, but this was cadmium yellow with the raw sienna. Added a little bit to it to make it blend in more with the background. Some of the background tones weren't just bright enough, I didn't think, and there's quite a lot of yellow in there, so I put more of that in. Now, when you're actually doing your painting, don't just think about adding the colour, also think about continually drawing as you're putting the paint on. So you're emphasising the shape of that gourd all the time, going around these shapes. So you've got lots of little spots on this skin, but also you want to make sure that you're making the shape of the thing as you go along. So think about that as that you're drawing with your brush as well as painting. So whilst that was drying, I made up the green colour. And because it's quite dark, I set off with an ultramarine, and I've just put a little bit of the cadmium yellow in there, just so that we're using the same few colours and not adding any additional colours. And again, this is going to take me quite a while to do. There's a lot of these green dashy lines in here. And again, if you look here where they're coming over, you've got one or two that sort of go along with the veins. I don't know if veins is the right word, but you know what I mean, the shape of these little domes. It emulates that and moves along the lines there, so, and that's all going to make the shape of the gourd. But you need quite a few little dots and dashes. You may even want a smaller brush if you've got more time to put in all this detail. I'm just trying to get a general feel for all these dots and dashes, but I'm not necessarily doing them all exactly as they are. And when I come back after I've done this this layer and allowed this layer to dry with this green, I will do a darker green where I just make a thicker mix up using the same colours, same ultramarine and cadmium yellow, but I will put a lot less water in and more ultramarine than yellow to get one or two of those darker areas. If you can see, it's darker sort of down here. Sorry, I'm pointing at the actual gourd, you can't see that at the minute. Down here it's the greens are a bit darker than they are in some of the areas up here. We've got a couple of tones of green really. In fact, there's a lot more than that, but for the sake of keeping it simple, we'll just use two different greens. Like I said, I don't know what's gone wrong with my voice today, it just keeps going on me. Obviously been doing too much talking. Okay, so I'll carry on now and put again a lot of dots and dashes in. I'll come back to you when that's dry. Now that first layer of green's dried, I'm going to come back with some darker green. I'm going to use this also to try and help me regain some of these lines that I've lost. You'll see I was rubbing this one out earlier. I just seem to have lost one or two of my pencil lines and the curves. So use it not just to put the shadows in, also use, you know, the darkest, not the shadows, the darker areas of green, but also use it perhaps to pick up some of those lines if you've lost them. So again, using it to move around the shape of the gourd. Continue drawing all the time, and this applies to any painting that you're doing. When you're applying the paint, you're not just adding colour and light, you're also continuing your drawing and building it up and correcting things as you go along. So this is a really nice thick paint now, nice and dark, but just the same two colours. I actually used a bit of this colour in the base here. I don't know if you can see that that green is right in the centre there. And again, that's going to help with this shape. and here it's much darker green, but not necessarily because it's not in the light, but just because of the markings. And actually watercolour has been a good choice for this subject as we go along, because the colours of the gourd are actually shining through each other, so the where you've got the green you can still see the yellow and the orange underneath it, which you can in this because of course watercolour is transparent, so it's really working well close up, looking at where those shapes are and the colours coming through. So really a lot of it is just dots, blemishes, and you don't want to be copying them exactly unless you get really bogged down in it. I mean, you could do if you've got a lot of patience and you want to do an observational drawing, that'd be great, but you probably just want to stick to trying to get a general feel for the shape. And it's knowing when to stop with this really, because we could go on for ages putting in some extra colour. We've lost the shape a little bit down this side, so I'll just imagine that this has got more green on this segment here, just to get a bit of that shape back. So use a bit of artistic license if you need to correct your drawing. Okay, and I think as far as the actual markings are going, I think I'm going to leave it at that. And now we'll come to the stem. So for the stem, it's sort of greeny beige really, so I'll use the same yellow that I used before and perhaps add a little bit of brown into that. So I'll use the raw sienna and I'll add into that some of the raw umber, just to make it a touch on the browny side. It doesn't need to be a lot because it's very pale, and plenty of water as well. And the top section is very sort of papery, so you might want just to leave some little sections there and leave that quite light. I'm actually not going to bother too much with all those little extra bits of detail, those whatever they were that were stuck to it. And I'll leave that to dry, and then I'll come back and put some more detail on that. And then we'll think about the shadow colours. So it's predominantly yellow and orange, so the shadow colour really wants to be either blue or violet. And I think I'm going to go with a violet. I think that's going to look quite nice, and I really do like the Winsor violet that I've got, so I'll just use that. I'll just make a very weak wash of it, quite a bit of water, and we'll pop that to begin with down here where we put those marks. So your shadows need to come up and touch your object. And obviously we need to go a lot darker with those, but we'll do that after that first wash has dried. So we'll just leave that all to dry for now. Now that that's dried, to get an even darker shadow, I'm going to mix some of the yellow and the violet together. So the yellow that we use, this mid yellow, not the very pale one, just using what's left in the palette and adding some of that violet to it. Now here, where your shadows intersect, that's going to be darker. And it's going to be darker right underneath there. Now if you want to, you can clean your brush out, dry it, squeeze it out, and then soften that edge. And this is entirely up to you whether you like that hard edge or not. I just prefer it to be a little bit softer. But you obviously need to do this whilst it's still fairly damp. This is drying quite quickly because I used the hairdryer to dry the previous layer, and it's quite warm in here as well. Okay, so that's nice and dark, and it's going to be dark a little bit more under here as well. And I'm going to soften that off as well. Get a little bit more in that corner. So I was going to get a smaller brush and put some of the detail around here on the stem using a smaller brush, but actually I've changed my mind about that. I'm going to get some pencils. So I've got a tin here of all sorts of different pencils, and it's just a quick and easy way really of just doing that little last bit of detail with a nice point on your pencil. Just sharpen things up a bit. Don't lose the colour that you've got there. Need something a little bit darker to make more of an edge. It's actually got quite a bit of green in, so let's go with a green. It's not showing up too much, and it's not showing up because this is quite fussy behind here. Just wondering if we should have simplified that a little bit. I'm just going to get a yellow. So here where it's gone quite green behind, if you get a yellow crayon you can get rid of that, some of that, and that's going to make the stem stand out a little bit more. So really I'm just faffing around now, and we could go on forever putting detail in and altering things, putting extra lines in. You need to know when to stop. And I think another thing I would do is just sharpen up one or two of these edges with the yellow, because apart from anything else it gets rid of those pencil lines a bit more. In fact, if you wanted to begin with, you could have drawn the whole thing using a yellow water soluble crayon, and then you don't have to worry too much about rubbing out the lines. I'm just feeling when I'm looking at it that we've got the lilac and the yellow and it's not gelling together. I feel like we need a bit more yellow in the base maybe. I'm going to make a wash of the cadmium yellow with plenty of water in it. Just make a table or something underneath here that's going to go across this lilac shadow. So of course your lilac shadow needs to be dry when you do this. You see what I mean? It looks a bit more unified, the whole thing. It just felt to me like it was the lilac at the base and the yellow at the top, and it wasn't unifying at all. So I think that's slightly better. Okay, so I'll stop waffling on now and let you go and have a go at that. So like I said, there should be some pumpkins or gourds at this time of year in your local supermarket. There's all sorts of different ones that you can get, different sizes and shapes, and then of course after you've drawn them you can make them into soup or whatever you want to do with them. But with this one it was just a case of looking at all these different dots and dashes that it's got all over it and getting those few colours in. But you could go much more complicated. You could be really quite detailed with it. I mean, if you look there, it's got sort of a blemish on it. It's got all these little blemishes in here. You could spend hours and hours studying that. Okay, so enjoy having a go at that. Let me know how you get on in the comments below, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in my next video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.